Hi, everyone. This is Sam Silverman, Managing Partner of EB-5AN. Thank you for taking time to join us on today's webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing a very important topic. In the last week, the latest visa bulletin included a warning about an impending EB-5 visa backlog for the new rural and/or urban TEA set-asides. And so today we're going to be discussing what that means and going through some examples of what similar text warnings have looked like over the years, and apply that to the current situation that we all just became aware of a few days ago. During the webinar, if you have questions, please use the chat box. We may or may not have time at the end to cover some questions. If we can't cover them, just send us an email at the email listed here, and we'll try and get back to them as soon as we can. And if you're interested in getting a copy of the slides, please also email us, and a copy of this webinar will be on our YouTube channel, along with a link to download the slides as well. Okay, this presentation is not legal advice, and it's for informational purposes only. You should always consult with your own legal counsel before making any immigration decisions. All right, where we're going to go today. First, a little bit about EB-5AN and the visa program. We'll introduce Ron Klasko and Klasko Immigration Partners. We'll talk about the main topic, the visa bulletin backlog warning and what that means. And then we'll spend a few minutes on a couple of rural and urban EB-5 projects as well. Okay, a little bit about EB-5AN. We're a leading EB-5 investment fund manager and regional center operator. We've worked with thousands of investors over the years. We own and operate more than 10 regional centers that cover the entire country. One of the things that sets us apart from many of the other operators in this space is our commitment to investment transparency. We provide all of the documents for a project and make it available to all of our investors, including the financial statements, which is extremely rare in the EB-5 space today. And of course, the goal is to make sure that investors have all of the potentially available information so they can make a fully informed investment and immigration decision. On our blog and YouTube channel, with 1,000 videos, we've published a significant amount of content about transparency, about diligence items, checklists, important things to consider when evaluating potential EB-5 projects. So I'd encourage you to explore our blog and our YouTube channel to help get educated on the EB-5 program and things that EB-5 investors should understand before finalizing an investment decision. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Sam Silverman, one of the two managing partners. A little bit about my bio and background is there on the left-hand side, and joined today with my partner, Mike Schoenfeld, and I'll let Mike jump in and introduce himself and share a little bit more about our company.
Perfect. Thanks, Sam, and really appreciate everybody taking the time to join this webinar. It looks like we have a really large audience today, both investors and a lot of industry participants, and that kind of goes to the background. Sam and I both came from more of the institutional side of the world, working at the Boston Consulting Group, and then I was in private equity after. And in the last 10 years, what we've really focused on is bringing transparency and information to the industry and trying to present data as clearly and cleanly as possible. And I think that's helped us to where, looking at the list of participants, lots of competitors, lawyers, friends, people from the industry, as well as investors or people looking to make their decision. And really appreciate everybody taking the time. And I'm sure we're going to have a very insightful webinar here.
Yeah, this is definitely a very important topic and one that's drawn a lot of interest. I think we had over 200 people sign up for this webinar. So it's definitely important both for investors considering making an investment in the next few months, as well as those who've already made one post RIA over the last 2 years as well. And also we have the privilege of having Ahmed Khan, formerly with Klasko, and a number of other leading law firms as well, now with EB-5AN, join us, and I'll let Ahmed jump in and introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So as you mentioned, my name is Ahmed. Very happy to be here. Started my career with Clasco and have kind of run the gamut of other law firms as well, learning a lot of different aspects of immigration and especially EB-5. I've also been a regional center executive for over 5 years now, most recently at EB-5AN, of course, and at another leading regional center before that. So yeah, been in the EB-5 industry for over 12 years. Excited to talk about everything that's going on in the EB-5 industry today and really just help investors understand what the landscape looks like over the next few months.
Perfect. Thanks, Ahmed. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things that makes our platform a little bit unique is that we cover the entire country in terms of our regional center network, which means we can select the most attractive and compelling projects, both rural and urban, from around the country. Unlike some of the other companies in this space, we're not limited to a specific geographic area. We're basically location agnostic, and we're looking for the absolute best projects regardless of their geographic location. This is a global map showing where many of our investors have come from. Most importantly here is that people of many nationalities and backgrounds from around the world have consistently found value in our investment approach. And we've had the opportunity to have our projects and some of our educational materials and industry updates featured in some of the leading publications, including the ones listed here. And it's my pleasure to introduce Ron Clasco. Ron is one of the most well-respected EB-5 immigration attorneys in the world, casually referred to as the godfather of EB-5. And we're very grateful that he's been able to carve out some time on short notice this afternoon to discuss his thoughts and experience, particularly given that he's been in the EB-5 space for such a long time and has seen other backlogs happen under prior rules. And so we're excited to have him with us today.
Well, thank you, Sam, Mike, Ahmed, and good to talk to everybody. I'm not going to talk to you too much about my background. I think most of the people on the call, either we've worked together with, or represented, or been on other webinars with. So you see a little bit about my background. I guess the most recent thing that I've talked to some of you about is the federal court decision we got in the Bulletin case, which changes how a path of funds may be dealt with going forward, source and path of funds. And many of you have heard me on that subject on a couple of different programs. But I'm very happy to be with you today. You're correct, my background does go back in EB-5 back to about 1990. So been through other backlogs, and we do in our firm, which is one of the biggest immigration law firms in the world. We do all types of immigration. And so we've seen backlogs, not just in EB-5, but in every other category, and have a pretty good idea of what it's going to mean. Let me first talk to you about what I'm not going to discuss. What you're not going to get on this webinar is some sort of prediction of exactly when I think the quota backlog will start, exactly how far back I think it'll go, whether it will include rural, whether it will include high unemployment, whether it will include both. All of those things are things beyond my or anybody's actual knowledge. The one thing I will say is, and this comes as no shock, there will be, even if we hadn't seen this visa bulletin, unless we were living under a rock, we know that there will be quota backlogs in EB-5. I think for most of us, the warning in the most recent January visa bulletin came a little bit quicker than we thought. Many of us hoped that we would be able to survive this fiscal year, which ends September 30, 2025, without quota backlogs. It is still possible that that could happen, but those of us who've been around a while view this as something that tells us it's more likely than not that sometime this fiscal year we are going to see EB-5 quota backlogs. Understand that, and I know that that the EB-5AN folks have put together some historical data showing that in recent times generally from the first warning in the visa bulletin until the actual visa bulletin showing a quota backlog has generally been in the 3-month area or so, 2 to 3 months, and that may in fact happen. However, I can tell you if you go back a little bit further, there's an example where the first warning of an EB-5 quota backlog preceded the actual quota backlog by more than 2 years. So it depends on an awful lot of things. It depends on how many 526s and 526Es are actually approved in the coming months. But more important than that, it depends on how many, the actual usage of numbers is the key issue. And the usage of numbers occurs when either the immigrant visa application overseas is approved and the person comes to the US and uses a number, or the adjustment of status is approved and the number is used. So if the Immigration Service starts really approving a lot more 485s and a lot quicker, or a lot more DS-260s and a lot quicker, then that's going to result in quicker backlogs of the quota. If things slow down, it will result in a longer time until the quota is reached. So all of these things are somewhat beyond our control. We're going to talk about how the new administration could impact this and what the historical example of the last Trump administration might have to do with this. But in the end, it's all going to depend on how many people actually in the next coming months actually get their green cards and actually use numbers. So with that said, let's talk about a couple of things that we know for certain. And then I want to go through with you 8 or 9 different issues that apply no matter when the quota is reached, no matter how far the backlog, no matter whether it applies to rural or high unemployment. So one thing we know for sure is that especially if you are in the United States, and especially if you are Indian or Chinese, and especially if you were considering concurrently filing for adjustment of status in order to get the employment and the travel document, that it is a smart thing to do that sooner than later. Now, there are issues with that. We've done other programs together where we've talked about, whether it's a good idea, and usually it isn't, to file for adjustment immediately after coming to the US. There are problems with that. So you definitely need to talk to your immigration counsel about this, but we know that there will come a point where the quota will not be current, most especially and probably most quickly for Indians and Chinese. And as soon as the quota is not current, it is no longer possible to file concurrent adjustment of status. We know that investors who are outside of the United States do not have that kind of an immediacy issue. However, even more when there are quota backlogs either in existence or coming. The one certain truth is that the sooner you file your application, the better it is. Because especially when there's quota backlogs, the key thing is getting your place in line. And usually when there are backlogs, they get worse before they get better. And so you want to, even if you're subject to a backlog, you want to have the earliest possible priority date. And the priority date is established on the date of filing the petition. So the one sure lesson from all of what we're going to be talking about is if you're thinking of doing EB-5, it is a good idea to do it sooner rather than later. So with that said, I want to talk about, Sam, Mike, and Ahmed, maybe on some of these slides with the charts and stuff, maybe you'll go through those. But I'd like to go to talking about 7, 8, 9 different things that I think everybody should be aware of as far as what the impact will be if there is a cutoff date in the visa bulletin. So,
Sure. And Ron, if you want, I can just give a quick background on kind of
sure, go
what
ahead.
got us to today or what prompted this webinar, and then yeah, we'll let you take it from there. And thanks so much for even getting us to this point. So yeah, like Ron said, look, there's really no way for us to know when the backlog will appear. But also, as Ron said, unless you've been living under a rock, we all knew that it was coming, right? That the long-term forecast for an EB-5 investor has not changed because of the new January Visa Bulletin being published. Everyone kind of knew it was just a matter of time. Everyone knows the countries that are going to be most impacted. I think EB-5 investors now are more informed than they ever have been in the past. There's multiple law firms, multiple organizations, including IIUSA, AIIA filing FOIA requests, gathering more information on per country application breakdown and supplying that to the general public. So everyone kind of knew it was coming. This is just now creating that little bit of, okay, even the Department of State now realizes that it's imminent. It may be 6 months away. It may be 3 months away. It may not even happen in this fiscal year, but they are recognizing that the filing volume has reached a point where they're starting to surmise, okay, we may need to limit the amount of applications that we're accepting in a specific scope, because we're seeing a visa backlog kind of starting to develop. Now, we've seen this movie before, right? The first visa backlog, and probably the most famous and the one that had the most effect, happened back in 2015, and it affected China. And we're still kind of digging our way out of that if you look at the legacy unreserved category for EB-5. So Sam, if we go to the next slide, we'll talk, it was really just a 3-month warning. And if you scroll down and look at Part E of the Visa Bulletin, the Department of State basically notes, all right, look, we're seeing specifically from this country that we're seeing a big increase in visas being issued or green cards being issued, and sometime in the near future, this category is going to have a cutoff date. They've even here, you'll notice that they've said that it will remain current for all other countries. So I think one of the things that the Department of State has been really good about throughout this entire process, and something that they've actually mentioned at speaking opportunities in industry conferences over the last year, is they're going to try to give us as much information as possible, right? And if we go to the next instance of this in 2018 with Vietnam, that's exactly what they did, right? We got the China kind of update, and the fact that there wasn't going to be a lot of forward movement. At that time, there were still too many filings and not enough green cards that were available for China. But Vietnam kind of just came up on the map and said, all right, it's going to be subject to a final action date. And so they kind of separated the two different countries and didn't just give us, some kind of general warning. They were pretty good about it. 3 months later, sure enough, we saw Vietnam backlog on the visa bulletin. And then the third time that we saw this was with India back in June of 2019. Again, you see here that they've kind of broken it down country by country, and they mentioned that India is probably approaching its limit in July, and sure enough, 1 month later, we saw that visa bulletin reflect that cutoff date. So what does this mean? It doesn't mean that it's going to happen within 3 months or 1 month or anything like that. In fact, I think if you look at the language for the January 2025 visa bulletin, they don't specify a country and they don't specify a specific category. The Department of State just notes, look, it may become necessary in the near future to establish dates of filing and final action dates during the fiscal year. They don't mention any specific country. They don't mention any specific timeline. And we've seen them do that in the past. So I think this is just the beginning of the Department of State giving us some kind of clue as to how they're thinking and that they've recognized this. But I don't think it's time to sound the alarm bell and it's all going to happen in the next month. But it's kind of coming. And if you look at the data over the last 2 years since the RA, and Mike, maybe you can talk about this, it's not hard to see what they're seeing, right? I think we all see this.
Exactly. Thanks, Ahmed. And that's one of the advantages that we have this time versus the prior 3 backlogs that we saw, is we have real data broken down by country, by category. And thanks to the work with the FOIA request, this is data through July of 2024. So we know there's another full 5 months of filing since then. So definitely hundreds more applications, if not 1,000 plus. We don't know yet. We'll know more on that by the end of the year. But generally what you can see here is this is data from the government. Way too many people have applied for the set aside categories in terms of the amount of visas. What we've tried to lay out here is just, this is the data raw from the government broken out by country. And then here is our analysis of taking what we have from the FOIA requests and then using reasonable assumptions to get to how many visas will need to be issued. And this is where it switches from pure science of numbers from the government to a bit of an art of how many visas will be associated with each application. The multiplier that we're using is 2. We think anywhere in between 2 and 2.5 is likely the right number to get to the total visa usage based on approval rate, family members, and things that we're seeing based on the FOIA requests. But very clearly, when you just walk through how many people have applied, especially by which country, you can get to the assumption we're going to need at least 8,000 visas for the high unemployment set aside, and that's just through July so far, and at least 5,000, probably closer to 5,600 in the rural category just through today. And then we know how many of those set aside visas will be available before having to spill over into any unreserved category. So just by doing pretty simple math here, if everybody was approved today and you fast forward it, you can see what the shortage looks like, is that we have another 5 or 6 years of reserved and high unemployment that'll be needed to clear out what's already been filed, and likely another half year of visas for the rural category. Again, nobody can get to exact numbers. We won't know that until there's approvals and visa numbers on that. But what we do know this time, for the first time in the history of what I've seen of backlogs, is we have very clear data where we can make a really good educated guess at how long is it going to take. And everybody should open their eyes and know we have it some time here where if you want an urban high unemployment TEA and you're in the US, you can absolutely still file and adjust status, get that 5-year work authorization. Everything's fine on that side. And the visa bulletin doesn't change the fact that this data is from July. You were already in a long backlog if you're choosing that category. And in rural, you're going to be teetering on the edge. And you can already know that, which is great. So you know what you're getting into. And this is just a little kick to remind you that it is going to backlog on that visa bulletin, and the ability to adjust will eventually go away, whether it's for high unemployment first or rural first. Definitely for China and India, based on what we're seeing in the numbers provided by the government, both should be backlogging. We don't know if one will be first before the other, but based on all the data available, we can come to a pretty reasonable conclusion. If you want to file and adjust status, do it soon. Sooner is better than later. If you want the green card anytime in the near future and you're from India or China, go down the rural path, but you can still get the benefits in the high unemployment path with the adjustment. So I'll kind of leave it at that, with just the takeaway that we have a ton of great data now. You can do your own homework and do your own analysis, which is much better than we've ever had before.
Yep, and we will have a little bit more. We will have a little bit more warning. We're going to get to that on a later slide. But if there was a backlog announced, in February or March, there will still be a few week kind of final grace period for investors to file applications, and we'll let Ron kind of walk us through that a little bit later. But before we move onto some more thoughts from Ron, Ahmed, do you have anything else you want to add on this one?
Yeah, I think Mike has really summarized the data that we've put together here in a good fashion, right? And again, I just want to reiterate, this isn't something, it's not like the visa bulletin has changed the long-term outlook. Any investor who was already considering EB-5, we've shared this slide before. It's not like this is new data or new information that has completely shocked the industry. We all knew kind of where we were all headed. I will say that, some investors might look at this, and I don't want them to think it's completely fruitless either, right? You're looking at an urban high unemployment area project, we really liked it, and you're looking at a 5,900 visa shortage, knowing that there's only going to be 1,000 visas after 2025 per category. It's a little bit better than that. There's a lot of other factors that come into play, such as the actual approval timelines, right? We're seeing anywhere from 1.5 years upwards for high unemployment. So you're not waiting as long as you might think. There's also more than just the 1,000 visas set aside for Indians and for Chinese investors per year. It's a little bit more complicated on how the waterfall works for visa allocation at the Department of State. So There's a bunch of other factors here, but use this as kind of a relative idea of what's been going on in the industry. The numbers speak for themselves, right? There's been a large number of high unemployment TEA applications already. And let's face it, there's half the number of visas available on a yearly basis. And on the rural side, there has been a large number of applications, but not to the same extent. And yeah, there's double the number of visas available on a year-to-year basis. So think about the priorities as an investor, right? If you're an attorney and you're advising clients, I think this is a good way. This is a good time to start letting them know, like, look, if your priority is getting the green card as quickly as possible, and you're from a traditionally backlogged country, you should probably give a little bit more weight to the rural category. If you are okay with a slightly longer wait period, maybe an extra 3 to 4 years or whatever it may be, for the green card itself, right? You're not dying for the green card. You're okay with the EAD, the advanced parole, which will run up all the way until you get that conditional green card in hand. You just want to kind of lock in your status and have a little bit more freedom in the U.S. Fine, that's totally okay to still consider urban TEA while you can. So I think with that, let's turn it over to Ron and talk about some of the implications of the visa actually backlogging and what that means pretty much immediately for a lot of the people who are considering EB-5, whenever it is that happens.
Thank you. So concurrent adjustment of status, as I mentioned before, is the single most immediate concern when we see the visa bulletin. So for many of our clients, the ability to file the I-485 with the employment authorization and the travel document applications is really critical. In one of my recent blogs called Why EB-5 is Better, it's one of the points I emphasize, that when the Reform and Integrity Act added concurrent adjustment of status for EB-5, it really created a boom for the EB-5 industry. So this, for some people, at some point, when there is a quota cutoff date, the ability to do concurrent adjustment of status will go away. However, the good news is that if you have filed concurrent adjustment of status, even if there's a long quota backlog, even if it's years and years of a backlog, you will still be able to keep and extend your employment authorization. You will still be able to keep and extend your travel document. If you were an Indian EB-2 or EB-3, was dependent on continuing to work with your employer, you'll still be in a position where you're not dependent on an employer, and you can continue to extend EAD and AP. Now, there's two different sides to this coin. On the one hand, if you're in the US and you were thinking of EB-5, again, this may lead you to decide to do it sooner rather than later. And I think it was Sam mentioned, you will get some notice of the quota backlog, usually about 20 days or so in advance of the cutoff date being implemented. You receive an advance copy, or we receive an advance copy of the visa bulletin that tells us on the 1st of the next month there will be a quota backlog. And so we'll usually have the better part of 3 weeks to act quickly to file concurrent adjustment for those who want it. However, again, as I've said before, this does not mean that it's a wonderful idea if you're outside of the US now to come in on a B1, B2 visa and immediately file a concurrent EB-5 and I-485. Because without going into a lot of detail, because we've done it on other webinars, but there's something called preconceived intent. And in many cases, it's a good idea to wait some number of months after entry before filing for concurrent adjustment of status. The second thing to talk about is the Child Status Protection Act and the issue with children who are nearing the age of 21. So what you need to understand is that the Child Status Protection Act protects against long processing times by the Immigration Service. So if the 526E takes 18 months for USCIS to adjudicate, that means that the child's age is frozen during those 18 months. But if at the end of the 18 months, and there's now an approval, and the quota is not current, there's a backlog, then the child's age is unfrozen. It's no longer frozen. So when we have no quota backlogs, it's usually safe to be able to file the 526E before the child's 21 and protect the child's age. When there are quota backlogs, it becomes important to file, some period of time, preferably years, before the child turns 21. And at that point, when we have a child who's concerned about aging out, the slower the government processing time, the better it is. Because if my child's aging out, I would rather have the age frozen for 2 years rather than 1 year. And that means I'd rather have my 526E pending for 2 years rather than 1 year. So that changes the quota cutoff dates, change the equations on the advice we give to families with children that may be turning 21. Next thing I want to talk about is the impact of the cutoff dates on when somebody's going to receive conditional permanent residence. It may well be that relatively short quota backlogs of a year or two, for example, may have little to no impact on when somebody's going to get a green card. Right? The quote, your place in line, your priority date is established on the date the 526E petition is filed. So once you are filed, let's say it takes 2 years to adjudicate the 526E. And let's say the quota is backlogged by 2 years. Well, by the time you get the approval, your priority date from 2 years ago is current. So in some ways, and I do expect we'll talk about this, you'll see later on the slide, we'll talk about the impact of the Trump administration. But for reasons we'll discuss, it's certainly very possible that we're going to see longer 526E processing times. And that could actually minimize the impact of the quota backlog because it may be by the time the 526E is adjudicated that the quota is available. What we end up seeing in forthcoming visa bulletins will certainly have, as Ahmed was talking about, an impact on project selection. So as we stand or sit here today, many of us are guessing that the high unemployment cutoff dates will happen sooner and maybe be longer than the rural cutoff dates. I can't tell you I'm 100% certain of that, certainly possible. However we and our working with our immigration lawyers view this, we certainly need to take into account when we're choosing a project, how important it is to us regarding what the quota backlog will be. And there's obviously a lot of factors that go into project selection. But if our single most important issue is which is likely to have a longer quota delay, it may be that high unemployment will be that, and that may or may not influence our selection of a project. The sustainment period is complex, and again, we did another webinar with the folks at EB-5 on this subject. So the concept here is, well, how long does an investor need to keep their investment pending in order to be able to complete the permanent residence process? And right now, the law is extremely unclear. The Immigration Service regulation says that you have to sustain your investment for 2 years beyond the date that you get your conditional permanent residence. The Immigration Service pronouncements about a year or so ago, based on their interpretation of the RIA, is that you don't have to sustain it that long. You only have to sustain it for a total of 2 years from the time you make your investment. How that will end up being resolved will be determined by a federal court, and is presently pending in federal court litigation. The bottom line is that if you're conservative and you're going to stick by the language of the regulation that says you have to sustain your investment for 2 years beyond the date of your conditional residence, quota backlogs will potentially significantly extend the sustainment period. Because if it takes you longer to get your conditional permanent residence, let's say it takes you a year or two longer than it otherwise would have, then that's going to extend your sustainment period by another year or two. Good news, if you want to call it good news, is that the longer the quota backlog, the more time the project has to meet the job creation criteria. Now, we get involved in probably hundreds of different projects. And we see projects where there's going to be more than enough jobs and more quickly than needed, and there's really no issues. We also see projects where job creation is delayed, the project's delayed for any of a number of different reasons. And actually having more time for job creation before the investors need to file the I-829 condition removal petitions is a good thing. And so for them, the longer quota backlog, longer retrogression periods mean that it will be a longer period of time before we have to file the I-829, and therefore a longer period of time for the project to meet the job creation criteria. Priority processing has always been viewed as a good thing, and only rural projects get priority processing. And my experience has been that the Immigration Service actually does process rural cases with some priority, more quickly than they do non-rural cases. That's always been a good thing, and the reason that some people choose to invest in rural projects. However, understand that a couple of things. Number one is priority processing is counterindicated, is not great if you have a child that may be aging out. Because as I said before, you want to have your petition pending as long as possible in order to freeze the child's age as long as possible. If the Immigration Service approves the petition in 2 months, and then there's a quota backlog, the age is unfrozen as of 2 months, and the child may age out. The other thing to keep in mind is that priority processing results in more rural cases being approved quicker. And that means that, if they're approved quicker and more of them, more numbers will be used, and that means that there will be more quickly quota backlogs coming up for, based on newly filed rural petitions. The last thing I want to mention on this slide is, there's nothing much in the world, and certainly nothing much in immigration or in EB-5, where we should not take account of the new administration. So we have some history with the Trump administration and 4 years. During the first 4 years of the first Trump administration, we were in a situation, it was pre-RIA, and we really had no regional center program for all intents and purposes. So we didn't see a lot of concern about processing times for 526Es. But what we did see, or those at that time was 526s, what we did see in all other aspects of immigration, including employment-based immigration, is that everything slowed down, and in many cases slowed down very significantly. And there was a very, very, very substantial decrease in the number of people getting green cards during the 4 years of the Trump administration. It was done in many ways. There's longer processing times of petitions, more RFEs and NOIDs, higher denial percentages, significant reduction of consular officers, which resulted in longer waits to get immigrant visa interviews. Most or all cases requiring interviews. Ultimately, all of these things resulted in decreases in the number of immigrant visas actually utilized. Now, that's obviously not good news. However, and many of you know this because certainly our office is inundated with people, EB-5 and every other category, who want to get things filed before January 20th. It's a very, very busy time for us. The only good news, if you want to call it that, is that all of that could result in fewer immigrant visas being issued starting in February of 2025. And if in fact fewer immigrant visas are issued, it could delay the onset of visa cutoff dates. So those are, without giving you projections and predictions of when and how much, those are 8 thoughts I wanted to share with you that I think are important as you judge your decision making and your strategy with EB-5 quota backlogs lurking in the background.
Great, thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Ron.
And we know there's a lot of complexity here, a lot of different moving pieces, and obviously everyone's personal situation, timing, availability of capital, and physical presence all factor in to that ultimate decision of when to file and in what type of project. But I think that's a good segue. So for Ron, as you advise potential investor clients that you work with, what are some of those kind of things that an investor considering making an investment, let's say in the next 3 to 4 months, what does that look like for someone who's kind of on the fence, has been thinking about it, but what steps would you suggest they explore?
Yeah, so as this slide says, and as I mentioned before, if everything I just said leads you to decide that this is something you want to do, and if we agree that doing it sooner rather than later is a good idea, number one, you do want to get your immigration attorney on board as soon as possible. Your immigration attorney is going to be responsible for helping you deal with your source of funds and advising you on the choice of an EB-5 project and a regional center. So certainly get your immigration attorney retained before you go to any other step, before you choose a project, before you start making transfers of capital in anticipation of an EB-5 application. For some people, preparing your source of funds documentation can be a quick thing. And for others, it can be a many month proposition. In some cases, it can be very complex, documenting complex financial transactions. So even if you say, well, all right, I'm convinced by Clasco, I want to get this thing filed in January, it may be that you're not going to have your source of funds documentation available until March, but the sooner you start working on that, the better. Again, the choice of an EB-5 project in a regional center can be done quickly, but hopefully you're going to do some due diligence working with your immigration lawyer in deciding both the project, is it going to be rural or high unemployment, which regional center is going to be the sponsor, what your priorities are. Is your most important thing getting a green card, even if you may lose your money? Is your most important thing the quickness that you're going to get a green card? Is the most important thing a regional center that has a long and good track record? Is your most important issue who the developer of the construction project is? There are a lot of different things that we discuss with our clients that go into their choice, and certainly not our choice, it's their choice, of which project and regional center sponsor is best for them. But until you make that decision and then make your investment, you can't file the application. So if this is a priority, steps 1, 2, and 3 that you see there really need to be action that you're taking, that you're putting to the top of your priority list.
And just to jump in there, we've been through a lot of these rushes for whatever reason, whether it was the fee increase or when other things have happened in 2019. And I can't emphasize enough, hire your attorney now before that 20-day shot clock goes off of having to file before you lose the ability to adjust. It's just not possible for a lot of attorneys to take on new clients. Get yourself in queue, start working on it. Yeah, that's my number one suggestion is if you know EB-5 is the right fit and you want to do it before a backlog shows up and to adjust status, hire the attorney now and don't worry about the project or any of that. Just get with the attorney, start on source of funds, and then when you're ready, choose the project.
Yep. And so kind of the inverse of this is for potential investors, what are some things to avoid? And I think Ahmed will let you jump in and just you're in touch with a lot of investors on a daily basis. Like what are some of the common areas of confusion and kind of false truths that are circulating around that would be beneficial for investors to kind of get an independent objective information on.
Yeah, and let's just go back to that slide because I really want to reiterate what Ron said. Step one really is if you I talked to a lot of investors that for some reason rotate 1 and 3. They really feel like unless they're inspired by some EB-5 project that just completely blows their socks off, that they're not going to move forward with this process. And then eventually they figure out, no, there's a lot of options for me out there. I'm going to have to make a balanced decision. But either way, you need an immigration attorney. And so I think the way that most people should be approaching their decision process right now is EB-5 as a visa category correct for me? Do I have the funds? Do I have the motivation? Is this the path that I want to choose for myself and my family? If the answer is yes, go straight to hiring an immigration attorney. You will have no better advisor. You will have no better person who's advocating on your behalf than the immigration attorney who's going to guide you through this entire process for the next 5 to 6 or however long years, right? So getting that person in place, a process is only so good as a team. It's paramount, and they will help you do everything else. They will guide you in terms of what you should be avoiding. They will guide you in terms of what you should be focusing on during the decision process. And ultimately, they're the ones who are going to be giving you unbiased kind of objective advice on what the right decision is for you and your family. And then that takes us to kind of the actual process of making that decision, right? And I think one of the things that we always see whenever we have something like this, right, an impending kind of backlog, or we saw it with the fee increases in April, is people tend to panic and they start making very quick, rash decisions, right? And so these are 3 of the things that I think that just off the face of the matter, you should try to avoid, right? You want to be a little bit more conservative, right? And if your big focus is to get your green card and get your money back through this process, you want to be conservative as you're looking through different projects. And so avoid the common pitfalls, right? We've talked about this a million times. Any pre-construction project, it might be fine, right? But just know that a pre-construction project will always have a little bit more risk than one that's already underway, that is already fully funded, that's already reached a certain stage of construction, right? And construction has a big bearing on your immigration process, not just your financial safety, but also in creating the jobs that are going to be necessary to get your ultimate green card, right? And in that same vein, if the project that you're looking at doesn't have all of its permits, it's not shovel ready, as a common term is used, if there's environmental permits that need to be obtained, if there's lack of financing that isn't there, these are a lot of the things that we're seeing as issues with 956F denials because of a lack of financing, lack of equity funding, permitting taking way longer than expected, therefore kind of increasing the amount of time that you have to be worried about job creation or the loan term starting on your deal. So this is low-hanging fruit. This is something that you can easily avoid by asking simple questions to the projects that you're looking at to, just put yourself in a better position. And then in terms of rash decisions, I can't stress this enough. Do your homework, dig into the details. Just because, we know that there's in some amount of time a backlog coming doesn't mean you should just throw caution to the wind and put your money in blindly. This goes back to what I was saying earlier about having that immigration attorney hired, that trusted advisor at your side who can give you really good, balanced, unbiased advice. As Mike mentioned, a lot of us have been through this before. And I think the lessons we've learned over the years is, look, you can't rush things of this magnitude. You have to make a good, balanced decision that's best for your family. And so making rash decisions just kind of predicated on getting the fastest process underway as you can is not always going to be the best thing for you and your family. I think always ask for substantiation for any data that you're receiving. Right, like I said earlier in the webinar, we are at an age where we have a lot of data at our fingertips. A lot of groups have dedicated a lot of time over the last 2 years since the Reform and Integrity Act, it's called that for a reason, to provide investors with as much information as possible. And you don't have to take our word for it. You don't even have to take your attorney's word for it. There's a lot of government provided data out there that as an investor, you now have access to. A lot of the investors that we speak to are in tech and data driven fields. Use that data, extrapolate from it, make your own determinations, make your own conclusions, and use that to make a decision that you, at the end of the day, are comfortable with. And I think, Ron did a really great job of kind of pointing out what the immediate kind of result of a backlog would be. Think about what's really important to you, right? I've said this now 3 or 4 times during this webinar. The long-term outlook for EB-5 has not changed because of the January visa bulletin, right? The things that will change is your ability to get that EAD AP, right? Maybe if you're overseas and you're thinking about timing to get to the US, that might be impacted a little bit. And you certainly want to think about the CISPA and age out ramifications that Ron laid out so clearly for everyone to kind of help everyone understand how that plays into it as well. So I think there's a lot to absorb from this. It's a small piece of news that we've received, but there's a lot that it kind of influences and affects. But I think that being measured in your approach and making sure that you're doing the necessary research will be a good way to make a great decision for yourself and your family and achieve success with the EB-5 program.
Perfect. Thanks, Ahmed. And now to kind of give us a quick summary before we move over back to Ron with some of the mechanics about that early warning that we touched on earlier. Mike, do you want to walk us through some of the kind of just major takeaways from this recent announcement on the visa bulletin?
Absolutely. And as Ron said, nobody knows, no one has a crystal ball exactly what's going to happen, but we've got data. So at a minimum, at least one country in one category, either urban or rural, will be backlogged. Now, looking at filings, there have been over 4,000 high unemployment filings, around 3,000 rural high unemployment filings. You can generally get a sense of what's going to happen here. There's a lot more in the high unemployment category. Not nearly as many have been approved, but there haven't been even close to enough rural applications approved to cause a backlog there either. So we don't know exactly what they're going to do, but we know based on the warning, at least one, probably 2 countries, China and India, based on the applications, in at least one category can be it's more likely high unemployment than rural, and we're going to have to wait and see how they publish that. Next is that because of this, even though, as Ahmed mentioned many times, this does not really change the long-term outlook for investors, especially those outside of the country, it will create a rush, which will create more investors in each category, which will create an even longer backlog. So unfortunately, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that this could push a lot of people that were considering it to invest in a short period of time and then push out the long-term timelines of getting the final green card eventually. Luckily, overseas investors, the situation doesn't really change other than the fact that there will be a rush now, and they'll have more clarity. Very soon, you'll be able to see how things are working, how the mechanics are, and we continue to get new statistics being released on how many people there are, and you can make your guess at how many visas that'll take and how long that backlog would be for you from your country that you're born and where you're applying. And I'd say that the key takeaway is if you are in the US and Indian or Chinese, and you know that you want to do EB-5, and this is the path that you want to take, you should move now if getting that EAD in advanced parole is important to you. There's no reason to wait. Hire the attorney now, even if it ends up being 6 months that we have before it hits the visa bulletin. It doesn't matter. We know it's coming in the relatively short order. Do it now if it's the right decision. Obviously, if you don't know if EB-5 is right, make that decision first. But if you are going to do it and you're based in the US, you should absolutely do it now and get those benefits, because after it hits the visa bulletin, you lose a lot of those short-term benefits, even though the long-term benefits remain.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. And now, Ron, can you kind of walk us through, kind of mechanically how that cutoff date works, and then, why there's going to be about 20-ish days between, a real kind of hard deadline for the EAD and kind of what that looks like?
Sure. So what happens, so I think we all know that we all have access to the visa bulletin at travel.state.gov. And the visa bulletin comes out every month. We generally get it, it's not clockwork always, but we generally get it we get the next month's visa bulletin generally around the 10th of this month. So as you see on the screen, we're expecting somewhere around January 10 we will get the February visa bulletin. And we want to look at that February visa bulletin under EB-5 and see what it tells us. Now, if it says C, as it has been saying for all of the set aside visa categories, C means current, means no wait, no issue, and we breathe a sigh of relief until February 10 when we get the March visa bulletin. At some point, and the visa bulletin is also broken down not just by categories, EB1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but also by countries. So at some point, we're going to look at the visa bulletin, and it is likely, instead of C for China or India or Vietnam, or in some cases even all countries, at some point, instead of C, we're going to be seeing a date. Let's say the date is May 15, 2022. What that means is that, and we're reading this on, let's say, on January 10th, and the visa bulletin tells us there's going to be a cutoff date for China in the rural category, in the high unemployment category of May 15, 2022. It means that starting in February, if our I-526E petition was filed after May 15, 2022, it will not be current in the month of February. And if we're hoping to file for concurrent adjustment of status, we will not be able to do it starting on February 1. So that's how it works. That's what we're looking for. Again, because it usually comes out around the 10th of the month, that's why we usually have 20, 21 days or so advance notice of whether there's going to be a quota backlog.
Got it.
Super helpful, Ron.
And so, Ron, in terms of, how much lead time, your office, let's say, needs to file a petition, is that enough time, 3 weeks, to get a whole application in? Or like how much lead time do potential investors looking to get their package together, roughly need to make sure they can file timely?
I hesitate to answer this because the true answer is we've definitely filed many petitions in a shorter time frame than that. However, it's one thing to do it in a case. It's another thing to have 100 rush cases that are going to have to be filed in the next 2 weeks. And once the visa bulletin says that there's going to be a backlog, there's going to be a huge rush on, those of us who, do large volumes of 526E filings. So as a general rule, there's a lot of advice that we give to our clients that generally can't be done in a matter of a couple of weeks. We talked about it, that there's in choosing a project, choosing a regional center, gathering source of funds. That's more than a couple-week project, assuming we have that time. If we don't have time, we're going to do what we do. It may not be as complete as if we had 2 months to do it, but we'll get it done. But certainly, if you want to get the best advice and have your application be as best as possible, you do want to give your immigration attorney more time than a few weeks.
Yep, and I would say that same kind of perspective also applies in terms of project selection, right? Each project has a set number of slots, and so in a situation like this where there's a huge spike in demand in a short few week period, it's very likely that the more popular more in demand projects, whether they be rural or high unemployment, will likely be filled fairly quickly as the demand spikes up. It's not like you can just turn on the machine and create more spots in a matter of weeks. These projects take months, sometimes years to structure, and so there's not just going to be a spike in available projects to meet a large spike in investor demand in a matter of days, right? So in terms of picking the immigration attorney that you really want, making sure they have capacity to take your case and get everything done correctly. And then with respect to the project, same thing, ideally you want to have your first pick of the project that you really want, because we're talking about a lot of capital here and also the immigration, future tied to that decision at the same time. And with that, I think we'll shift over and just spend a few minutes. I'll have Mike jump back in and talk to us about some of the different rural and urban projects, and with the context of again, no one has a crystal ball, but we do believe that the urban high unemployment category will be the first one to backlog, and so with that in mind, we expect there to be a spike in demand, particularly for those urban projects where there'll be a much shorter period for investors to invest and get the EAD and AP.
Yep, thanks, Sam. So since the passage of the RIA, EB-5 has changed a lot, where it's no longer a one-size-fits-all approach to projects. EB-5 projects used to be pretty standard, mezzanine debt, 5-year term. Everything was pretty standard back when it was only TEA versus non-TEA. Lots of large developers used the same formats. That's not the case anymore. Now we have the two big distinctions, which we talked a lot about today, rural versus urban. And what that does, though, is that projects in different areas tend to act differently. So what we have found is that in the rural areas, we've worked on many projects at this point, and nearly all of them are large master plan communities with 10-plus year construction timeframes ongoing. Those are the ones that can have a proven track record with tons of construction already underway, and we're able to structure the deal. But generally, that means that the loan term, the time of the EB-5 investment, is going to be longer to get to that exit into where the capital is really valuable to the developer. So the rural deals tend to get you your green card faster. You'll be processed faster. There's more set-asides. Even if both were to backlog based on the data, you're getting the green card much faster in rural, but your money will likely be tied up longer. Although with these types of deals, there's cash flow, and it is very possible that they repay earlier than the maximum term, but you should never count on that. So we have two projects available now. One is Rocky River, which is the follow-on to our Twin Lakes project. It's another Crestwind community built by the Coulter Group right outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. That's a great rural deal. We expect to get the 956F approved soon, and we recently launched that. Our other rural deal is Tamarack Resort, located right outside of Boise, Idaho. An amazing ski, golf, and lake resort. It's been under construction for many years. There's a great developer and strong equity in it, and they're using this as the growth capital. And that project is 956F approved with all jobs created for every investor and qualifies as rural. So that's the project that has all jobs, is pre-approved, and is really attractive right now to lots of investors looking for that rural TEA. But both of those are longer. Tamarack could be up to 6 years, although we expect a little shorter. Rocky River up to 7 years. In terms of the urban category, this is where we've been able to get a little bit more creative. There's thousands of really good high unemployment deals that qualify under the high unemployment category. So we've been able to cherry pick the ones that we could structure in a little bit of a unique way for investors of what they were demanding. And that includes our One Tampa project on the lower right, which is a loan style project with a repayment guarantee that should be returning money in between 3 and 4 years from today. Short investment time frame. There's a distribution restriction to where when that project's done, the developer gives the money back. It is an urban TEA, so assuming you're eligible for repayment, you can get it. If for some reason the sustainment period changes, then you would have a problem and have to maintain the at risk. But that was designed to be that safe loan, but with a really short duration to get the money back in the urban category because you can adjust status and get a lot of the benefits. The Boynton Beach deal is one of our few equity projects where you are getting a bit more upside in terms of a return, where you're investing alongside the developer in the equity part of the capital stack. And that one is also targeting a relatively short repayment timeline of under 4 years with a real rate of return associated with it. And again, all of these are different flavors. There's no one size fits all. It really matters what the priority of every investor is, whether it's get the green card quickly, get the money back as fast as possible, get a return, but know that you're taking a little bit more risk and be in the equity position. We have all flavors of deals depending on priorities, and always want to make sure that it aligns with what an investor is looking for. And what I'd say is, as we've highlighted on this webinar, we definitely want investors to get their attorney on board, do the source of funds, figure out what's actually most important to you. Can you wait 5+ years to get the green card on the EAD and AP? If that's okay with you, great. If not, you want that green card in hand as fast as possible, choose rural. So overall, we have a lot of good projects. We're happy to speak in detail about them. Please reach out to us. And I'd say definitely reach out to Ron and team. Classical Immigration is one of the best in the business. They have a great track record of getting approvals. We love working with them. And overall, we appreciate everybody's time spending with us today for this groundbreaking development that we knew was coming, but it's finally hit where something is going to change. And thanks again, Ron, for taking the time with us.
My pleasure. I always enjoy it. Thank you.
Yep. And again, if anyone has questions that we weren't able to cover, please reach out to us. Ron's contact details are there. Feel free to schedule a call with our team, and we're happy to spend time, walk you through the different questions, concerns that come up. One other thing to just quickly note is independence. So Ron and his team are completely independent from EB-5AN. And so we really value independence with respect to the attorneys that work with our clients. As much as we like Ron and we refer a lot of clients over to his team, investors can select any EB-5 attorney, that they like. When working with us, we don't have any restrictions whatsoever. You just want to make sure that you interview a couple attorneys and find that right fit in terms of personality, responsiveness, and relevant experience. And just keep in mind that it is a long-term relationship. You are going to be married to that person, for a number of years. This is not, just a 1 or 2 month process. And so, you really want to pick somebody that you're comfortable with, that is going to be there, and make sure the whole process goes smoothly. And Ron and his team have worked with literally thousands of investors over 25-year plus career. So he's very experienced in all aspects of the process. So thank you again, Ron. We really appreciate it. And yeah, we hope this was helpful for anyone. And again, questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.